if you missed it in the morning. Here is the best of the Big Breakfast on Racing Radio.
I'm out to face the new Cherry with us this morning here on the Big Breakfast on Racing Radio. The number one print cricket journalist in the world right now, in my opinion. It's great to have him on the Big Breakfast. Robert Crash Craddock, very good morning to you, Crash. David Short and Richie Bell with you. Welcome to the Big Breakfast.
Nice to talk to you, David. Richie, and hello to everyone in Perth. It's always happy days for me when I get over to your fair city, and it's lovely to talk to you guys.
Crash, such an exciting time for Australian cricket. We're heading into the Ashes tomorrow night. It gets underway, and well, I was saying to Richie earlier on this hour, I wasn't all that excited about our prospects going back probably 3 weeks ago, but with the appointment of Darren Lehman, they've shored up the top of that batting order. Shane Watson looks like he'll be opening with Chris Rogers. Cowan at 3. He's kept his cards close to his chest in regards to who he might play from a bowling lineup perspective. The dressing room seems to be a happier place at the moment. In a fairly short space of time, the Aussie stocks seem to be on the rise, at least in a small manner.
They do. Look, I never overread county form. Worcester and Somerset rested bowlers, so, you certainly wouldn't call those two attacks fire-breathing dragons. They were right for the picking, and we certainly picked them, and I've got to tell you this, it's a quantum leap from that from how we played in India when we were being bowled out in the tour games by no-name spinners who no one's ever heard of were taking 7-wicket hauls. This is a step forward. We'll play better than India. Look, the jury's out facing Jimmy Anderson at Trent Bridge, where he averages 17 runs per wicket. He's a master under leaden skies there. When you turn on the broadcast tomorrow, if you see the skies are leaden, and they're not expected to be, but England are bowling first, just watch this master of the art. He can swing the ball both ways. It's his favourite test ground. He's terribly difficult there. So, look, it won't be easy. But you know what? England have won just 4 of their last 13 tests. So they are not a superpower. They're just a very good team.
Anderson, you're spot on. He's such a dangerous man with the ball. Also, Broad has caused some problems for Australia in time gone by. What's the latest on Graham Swan? Because we know that he had an injury scare heading in towards this series. Is he going to be all okay to take part right throughout the course of the series?
Yeah, he will be. He did have an injury, but he's back. He's since taken a few wickets since then. Very feisty performer. But here's the thing, all right? If we're going to have a glass half full approach to this series, you can tell the blokes that he's only averaging 40 runs per wicket against Australia. He's never destroyed us. He's had to work very, very hard for his wickets, And I think that's worth noting. Graham is relentless. He's fit. He's crafty. But he's not Matai Muralidharan. So once again, you can demystify the challenge slightly.
Well, this morning, Rob, we're here to talk about you and your career. How did it all begin?
Yeah, well, I did a journalism degree in Toowoomba, and which I really, really loved, and doing it. And they were back in the days when papers were expanding, not contracting like they are now. It's become a desperately tough game, the newspaper game. But they were happy days, and I went to school on a bus through the trotting region, which picked up the sons and daughters of about 5 trotting trainers. And it gave me a love for harness racing that is as strong today as it was 40 years ago. And, Rich, I hear you calling very, very nicely at Gloucester Park. And it's my favourite stop on the whole cricket circuit. Friday night, Gloucester Park, under the stars. And Gary Hall Jr. and guys like that. To me, I walk in there on the Friday night of the Perth Test match, totally stressed out, and leave without a care in the world. I still think it's the best night out in racing in Australia.
I think Ken Casellas feels the same way, and he's working at both venues.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the rich tapestry of Gloucester Park. Back in the 50s, guys like Peter Burge, cricketer for Australia, used to take the West Indies touring team there. And it's lovely to see that hospitality flow to South African broadcaster Neil Manthorpe, who John Burt and the boys took him into the committee room, and he said, you know what, mate, I've been travelling around following cricket for 20 years in all cricketing nations. He said, it's one of the best nights I've had, so it sparkles there. And what I love most about Gloucester Park is the crowd. Like, you just don't get it. I live in Brisbane, and Albion Park's a ghost town. Menangle, Melton, they're desperately soulless places, whereas the park's got a soul and something you should be really cherish.
Yeah, it's a special place. It's a great, and the backdrop too, being across the road from the Wacker, the location's just ideal. And you're 100% right. There's been so many, both cricket journalists, but also players heavily engaged in harness racing. Mark Waugh's one that certainly in recent years has had a really strong association with harness racing. Guys like Ricky Ponting really loves the punting caper. There's so a great outlet for a lot of the cricketers when the game's not on.
Oh, it is, and look, as we speak, I'm at the airport terminal in Brisbane, flying to Sydney, where our guest on the back page tonight is Mark Waugh. And I tell you, when I see him in the green room, the first thing we'll start talking about is trotting, you know, and some of his greatest memories were in Perth when he had a horse called Four More, who Ken Casella said, bring over to Perth, see if we can win a few over here. And I think they won $100,000 in Perth. And it was out of a mare called Hit Wicket, which Mark named after the time he hit his own wicket against South Africa in Adelaide. So I know what'll happen. The first thing I'll say is, you know, did you see I'm the Mighty Quinn on Friday night? And they go, yeah. Well, what about, you know, and away it'll go. So there's this little boutique sort of band of harness racing brothers across the world. There's not many of us, but that's why we celebrate each other's company.
There was always a form guide floating around. I was reading Ian Botham's biography recently. I don't know if you've read that, Rob, but he talks about Brian Close, one of his mentors in county cricket, and how Brian Close apparently was one of the worst drivers going around, but he used to drive Ian Botham all around when Ian Botham was young. Apparently he had the Sporting Globe, which was the big racing newspaper at the time, usually sitting on his lap while he was driving the car, trying to work out who was going to win the next race at Sandown or Royal Ascot. And apparently there were some very scary moments with Brian Close behind the wheel.
Yeah, and that's the sort of colourful character you barely see around the traps these days. And, you know, cricket and racing have always often gone hand in hand. I mean, I know Peter Burge in Sheffield Shield games back in the 1960s when Queensland was playing West Australia. He was known to take a transistor radio on the field with him in the slips and listen to a race. and you know, it's that sort of larrikinism which makes Australia what it is, really. It's just terrific.
It's a pretty special caper, and it works so well as an outlet for so many of these players. Even right through to this day, it seems to be working incredibly well. Crash, you went from doing your time in Toowoomba to get involved in the print media. You've travelled the globe pretty much every venue over the years. Have you got a favourite test venue that you've been to?
Yeah, there's a couple, and you know what? They're not. I mean, I've been to every Perth test since 1993 because when I retired from travelling the globe cricket writing in 2007, I just said to my boss, can I just ask one favour? Can I still keep doing Perth? And he said, oh, all right, you know. But I really love Cape Town in South Africa. It's got the Table Mountain in the background. It's just full of history. And you know, England's got some funny test grounds. Some of them are old and a bit moth-eaten, but God, they just breathe character, you know. And I just thought Matthias Muralitharan's little home ground at Candy, you know. He's a great spinner, Murali. When we were there, I went up to his biscuit factory where his dad sort of, you know, funded Murali's career, and you see these little conveyor belts of chocolate chip biscuits coming off. And from that humble start, he founded one of the great careers in cricket history. So each nation has its own charm, but I've got to say, Cape Town always stood out for me. When the mist is on the mountain and you're staring up, it's just like being on a cloud, and it was special.
Spectacular. What about the West Indies? Have you been to many of their grounds?
Yeah, I have, and they, well, they've all been done up due to Chinese influence. All the Chinese money has come in and done up those grounds. But when they were in a bit of a ramshackle state, they had just fabulous character with little impromptu discos there, and you know, you like the players were so intimate. You felt, you know, they'd come down to the boundary and the press boxes were open air and about 2 metres. I remember Curtly Ambrose once fielding about 3 metres in front of me on the fence in Antigua, and my gosh, he was an intimidating guy. He was the toughest guy we ever had to deal with, boys. He hated journalists. He gave 3 interviews in his whole career, and we had a roster system where we'd ask him for an interview, And he'd simply look at you and say, you know, get lost, man, or sort of an interview, and just walk away. Like he just treated you with complete and utter disdain. And if Ken Castells is listening to this show, he'll be laughing along because he knows how difficult. But you know what?
He must have had that experience, Rob, as a young player with a journalist.
Yeah, he did. And I'll tell you what it was. When he was in England, they wrote a story about him having a love child, and he felt it was, that appeared in one of the tabloid papers in England, and he never forgave, and he said, I'll never talk to the press again. He did do about 3 interviews in his career. Majestic too. He was really colourful. But the rest of the time, he just completely spurned the press. We grew to like him in the way you're sort of like the big bad man in the Westerns. You know, the bloke who you're sort of the gunslinger, like Big Evil Curtly. You know, we sort of grew sort of fond of us partly because he hated us. How about that?
You talk about facilities around cricket grounds as well. Things are so much more professional now, but there were certain grounds where change rooms could only fit 4 or 5 players at a time.
Yeah, look, there was, and it's all changed. And I've got to say, sometimes the redevelopment is not great. I mean, the Gabba, the old Gabba, where they'd cook the steaks and the players would smell the steak fumes coming from the cricketers' club. They had the old sort of big mango trees there, and it was a real colourful cricket ground. Now the Gabba is a perfectly functional football ground with not one scintilla of character or flavour. And it's quite sad, you know, because it's just got zero character. And that, to me, is the great skill. And that's why I like to see Perth retain its grassy embankments and all that, because you still want a cricket ground to be a cricket ground. I know it's got to be spectator-friendly, but there's something about having, you know, sort of just somewhere where people can relax and put down a blanket. That, to me, is a cricket ground.
Crash, we know that you've got to jump on a plane, so when you need to go, please just let us know, and we really do appreciate your time this morning here on the show, so just let us know when you've got to run. The best innings that you've ever seen, you've been to so many of these different test matches, is there one particular knock that you've seen over the years that stands out as the best innings you've ever viewed?
There was a knock that Steve Waugh played in the West Indies, and everyone's going to say, oh yes, the 200 he made when we won the Frank Worrell Trophy in 1995, but it was the knock before that where he made 60 on a wicket where the grass was so long in Trinidad. I went out with my ballpoint pen, all right, and the grass was 1.5 inches long, and I marked it on my pen and measured it, and honestly, scoring, I reckon 15 runs was the equivalent of 50 on that wicket. And Steve got hammered. He got hit about 7 times. And I saw him at a function that night, and I walked up and I said, I've got to say, mate, that was just fabulous to watch. And he said, you know what? He said, for some reason, when I got smashed in the elbow and smashed in the ribs, he said, I don't know why, but I loved it. He said, it turned me on. He said to me it was war, and I loved it. He said it was just vicious, viperous, and he said if you score a run, you were so happy with yourself. And I just thought, to me, that embodied the man, the struggle, and everything he stood for, that gutsy 60. And it's an innings which has disappeared in the midst of time. No one ever talks about it, I'm telling you. So, but it was really special, and for me, an epic, one which truly defined the player.
Often it's those innings where you just dig in and you make a 50 or a 60 and a score of 150 that can be the most challenging and the most valuable, because anybody can make runs on a road, but they're the conditions that really sort out the boys from the men.
Well, you're so right. I mean, I remember the great Barry Richards asking him what his toughest innings was, and he said that against Derek Underwood, the left-arm spinner in English county cricket on a wet wicket, they were chasing, they lost 7 for 16, and to quote Barry, he said, I don't even know how we got those 16 runs, don't ask me, but he said we were chasing about 90, and he said I made 40, and he said when I returned to the dressing room I was a lather of sweat and really quite distressed, like just exhausted, and he said because every ball was just so difficult, and I thought, yeah, you're right, but that's players love that, you know, they see it. The great players love those conditions because they're so challenging.
Something about cricket journalism, Rob, it's such an esoteric game as far as the sport is concerned. It really gives a journalist an opportunity to blossom with his writing. That's
a very astute sort of observation, and I really think that's the beauty of cricket writing. Like, I've been writing about cricket for 30 years, and it still turns me on when I switch on the London Times, the Times of London, and see Michael Atherton and the joy of being able to of his poetic sort of writing, which has got everything: hard-hitting opinions, depth of knowledge, observations, and cricket when it's presented. Cricket should be a game that keeps newspapers alive, because there's that certain prose about it that's sort of almost unique to it. And you're right, some blokes, Derek Pringle in England, Greg Baum from The Age, some blokes, the late great Peter Roebuck, I thought did it as well as anyone.
Yeah.
So it was. I agree.
Who's been your favourite cricketing broadcaster over the years, Rob?
I like Kerry O'Keefe. I like Michael Atherton because of his sense of authority, and Kerry O'Keefe because of his sense of, how would you say it, of quirkiness, humour. He's a great technical analyst, but he's also very humorous as well, so he's a beauty.
He's one man that can make cricket listenable for hours on end for people that aren't even into cricket.
Yeah, he is, isn't he? He's an absolute gem. I just think that I know 12-year-old kids that like him. I know 60-year-old men who like him, so he's just great, yeah.
He's an absolute ripper. What's your prediction for the upcoming Ashes series? What do you think this scoreboard will read after the 5 tests, Robert?
England will win 2-1, and then in Australia will win 2-1 because England will run out of fast bowlers, and we got about 8 of them.
Nice.
But, boys, I better fly. They're just putting now, but it's lovely to chat to you all, and good luck to everyone harness racing in Perth, Mick Radley, young Michael Brennan, a trainer who I follow very closely. I think he's a good young kid. I'd give him a horse any day if I had the money, which I don't.
Good on you, Crash. We'll tune into the back page tonight on Fox Sports to see the latest from your good self. All the very best. Enjoy the Ashes. Thanks, Rob Craddock here on the Big Breakfast on Racing Radio.
From 6 a.m. on Racing Radio.